broken translator mishap, greeting the lustful Fox-Vixen, leads to her erotic undressing. The broken bridge of words. Darian Ashford clutched the worn leather satchel against his chest as the carriage rattled towards Silvermere's foggy borders. The ancient translation device inside felt heavier than its actual weight, carrying with it his entire research grant, his academic reputation, and his last chance to prove that human-spirit relations could be peaceful. The device had been salvaged from ruins, its mechanisms partially corroded, but the university had assured him it was functional enough for basic communication. As the carriage departed, leaving him alone on the misty road, Darian noticed the sudden silence. No birds sang, no wind stirred the silver-leaved trees. Then he saw her. She emerged from the fog like a living flame wrapped in moonlight. Her silver hair cascaded over bare shoulders, and a magnificent tail swayed behind her with predatory grace. Her amber eyes locked onto him with the intensity of a hunter sizing up prey. This was clearly one of the fox spirits he'd read about, but the texts hadn't mentioned how utterly breathtaking they were. "Another foolish human wandering where he doesn't belong," she said, her voice like silk over steel. Her lips curved into a cruel smile that made his heart pound with equal parts fear and fascination. Darian fumbled with the translator, his fingers trembling as he pressed the activation rune. He took a breath and spoke the formal greeting he'd memorized. "I come with respect and peaceful intentions, honored spirit guardian." The device hummed, glowed, and produced a string of melodic sounds in the spirit tongue. The woman's expression transformed instantly. Her eyes widened in shock, her smile vanishing as her entire body went rigid. A flush spread across her pale cheeks, and she took an involuntary step backward. What did you just say?" she whispered, her voice shaking. Darian blinked in confusion. "I greeted you respectfully. Why? What's wrong?" But the translator betrayed him again, converting his innocent question into something that made her tail bristle and her breathing quicken with unmistakable emotional turmoil.
The vulnerable heart beneath. Nalithra Moonwhisper pressed a hand to her chest, feeling her heart race in a way it hadn't in centuries. The human's words, those impossibly intimate, achingly sincere words, echoed in her mind like an ancient song she'd forgotten she knew. They spoke of eternal devotion, of souls intertwined, of promises made under silver moons. Words no human should know. Words that resonated with the deepest part of her spirit nature. "You cannot simply..." She began, then stopped, struggling to maintain her usual composure. "Do you have any idea what you just..." Darian frantically checked the translator, worry creasing his features. "I'm so sorry if I offended you. Please, I meant no disrespect. Let me try again." He spoke carefully into the device, attempting to apologize. The translator hummed and produced another string of sounds. Nalithra's breath caught. This time the words translated as a pledge of protection, of wanting to shield her heart from all sorrow, of seeing beauty in her that others feared. Her knees felt weak. For 300 years, she'd cultivated a reputation of cold cruelty, keeping all beings at a distance. Yet this bumbling human with his broken device was dismantling her defenses with every accidental utterance. "Stop talking," she commanded, but her voice lacked its usual edge. She moved closer, studying his face with newfound curiosity. He had kind eyes, she noticed, eyes that held genuine concern rather than the fear or lust she typically encountered. "I truly don't understand what's happening," Darian admitted, setting the translator down carefully. "But I can see I've upset you, and that was never my intention." Without the device, his words were just sounds to her, but his tone carried sincerity. Nalithra found herself softening, her defensive posture easing. She reached out slowly, her fingers hovering near his face, then pulled back as if burned by the intimacy of the gesture. "You've done something impossible," she whispered in her own tongue, knowing he couldn't understand. "You've made me feel again."
Laughter in the moonlight. Darian gestured toward a fallen log near the forest path, miming an invitation to sit. Nalithra hesitated, then gracefully settled onto the silvered wood, her tail curling around her feet. He sat at a respectful distance, though something in her expression suggested she might not mind if he moved closer. He pointed to himself. "Darien," he said clearly, then pointed to her with a questioning look. "Nalithra," she responded, and the corner of her mouth lifted in what might have been the beginning of a real smile. Encouraged, Darien tried to explain his situation through gestures, pointing to the translator, making exploding motions with his hands, shrugging helplessly. Despite herself, Nalithra laughed. The sound was like wind chimes in a gentle breeze, delicate and genuine. She began speaking in her own language, her voice animated as she gestured at the translator, at him, at herself. Though he couldn't understand the words, her meaning became clear through her expressions. She was explaining what his mistranslations had actually said. When she mimicked his serious, formal tone, while apparently describing something deeply romantic, they both dissolved into laughter. The moon rose higher, casting silver light through the trees. Nalithra found herself sharing more than she'd intended, not through words he could understand, but through the universal language of emotion. She touched her heart, then gestured to the empty forest around them, and he understood. Loneliness. Darien responded in kind, showing her the heavy books in his satchel, miming people turning away from him, rejection and isolation. Different worlds, same pain. Nalithra shifted closer on the log. The space between them felt charged with possibility. She reached out tentatively, and this time didn't pull back. Her fingers brushed against his hand, cool and soft. He turned his palm upward, an offering, and she placed her hand in his.
The language of touch. The night deepened around them, stars emerging like scattered diamonds across velvet darkness. Darien's thumb traced gentle circles on Nalithra's palm, marveling at how natural this felt, despite the impossibility of their connection. She watched his face with an intensity that made his breath catch, her amber eyes reflecting starlight. Nalithra spoke softly in her tongue, words he couldn't comprehend but whose emotion he felt deeply. She brought their joined hands to her cheek, closing her eyes as if memorizing the warmth of his touch. When she opened them again, vulnerability shone there, raw and unguarded. Darien released her hand only to stand, offering both hands to help her rise. She accepted, and they stood facing each other in the moonlit clearing. Slowly, giving her every chance to withdraw, he stepped closer. His hand lifted to her face, fingers trembling as they traced the elegant line of her jaw. She leaned into his touch, her own hand rising to rest against his chest, feeling his heartbeat thunder beneath her palm. The translator lay forgotten in the grass as they communicated in this new language, one of careful touches and meaningful gazes. Nalithra whispered something, her voice thick with emotion, then closed the remaining distance between them. She rested her forehead against his, their breaths mingling in the cool night air. Her arms wrapped around his neck, and his encircled her waist, drawing her closer. "I don't need words to know what I'm feeling," Darien murmured against her hair, knowing she couldn't understand, but needing to say it anyway. Nalithra responded by tilting her face upward, her lips barely brushing his in a question, an invitation. When he answered by closing the space between them, the kiss was tender and searching, filled with wonder. Her fingers tangled in his hair, while his hands splayed across her back, holding her as if she were precious and fragile. When they finally parted, both breathless, Nalithra smiled, truly smiled, and it transformed her entire being from fearsome to radiant. The choice to stay. Dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold as Darien worked carefully on the translator, his knowledge of ancient mechanisms finally proving useful. Nalithra sat beside him, her head resting on his shoulder, watching his hands move with practiced precision. The device hummed to life properly for the first time, its runes glowing steady and true. Darien held it up, then looked at Nalithra. She understood the significance. They could finally communicate clearly, without the mistranslations that had brought them together. He spoke into it carefully. "Can you understand me now?" The translation emerged perfect and clear. Nalithra nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Yes, I can understand you perfectly." Darian set the device down between them and took her hands. "Then let me tell you truly. Everything that's happened, every mistaken word that brought us to this moment, I wouldn't change any of it. What I feel for you isn't a mistake. It's the most real thing I've ever experienced." Nalithra's eyes glistened. "For 3 centuries, I've been alone, wearing cruelty like armor. Then you arrived with your broken words and gentle heart and somehow translated what my spirit truly needed to hear, that I deserved to be loved, not feared." "Stay with me," they said simultaneously, then laughed at the synchronicity. Darian picked up the translator, turned it over in his hands, then deliberately switched it off. "We don't need this. We've already learned each other's most important language." Nalithra cupped his face in her hands, kissing him with a tenderness that spoke of new beginnings. "You walked into my forest a stranger," she whispered against his lips, "but you've become my home." They spent the morning creating their own vocabulary. A touch meant "I'm here." A certain smile meant "you make me happy." An embrace meant "you're safe with me." And in that clearing in Silvermere, 2 lonely souls found that sometimes the most profound connections form not despite our imperfections, but because of them. Lessons. Love requires no perfect translation when hearts speak the same language of honesty and vulnerability. Our mistakes and imperfections often lead us to the connections we need most, if we're brave enough to embrace them. True intimacy is built not on flawless words, but on the courage to be seen, understood, and accepted as we are. The greatest romance begins when we stop performing perfection and start sharing our authentic, broken, beautiful selves.